Thank you very much, Christina, and welcome to everyone here for the broadcast. You know, I hope this isn't just another one of your Zoom calls today. I purposefully tried to dress up as funky as I could to bring a little bit of levity to otherwise, you know, kind of crazy times. And speaking of which, these crazy times are equal crazy times for you, every competitor you have in the market, every single person trying to do business today. And what that presents is a generational opportunity for you to gain a competitive advantage in your market for years to come using design thinking and challenging some conventional wisdom, so to speak, that we've held about where we work, how we work, and who we work with for more than a century. Speaking of more than a century, I'd like to begin this presentation by going back in time to take a look at the impact of the 1918 pandemic on thinking and design. The 1918 pandemic was incredibly disruptive, most notably with widespread casualties, loss of life on a scale that we haven't seen in the world of pandemic history in the United States. It also was very disruptive to labor pools, it was disruptive to the world of work, and it was disruptive to the economy. However, many people at the time looked at that disruption, that widespread disruption, as an opportunity to redesign things for the better. I'm going to go a little bit geeky here because my team and I, we've done a lot of research on the 1918 pandemic and the type of redesigns that it triggered. So I'm going to talk about a few. I'm going to go from small to great. Small. Space heaters. So space heaters, very powerful space heaters that sit right below the window in an apartment, actually came to fruition after the 1918 pandemic. Shortly thereafter, there was something called the fresh air movement. There was a new consciousness, and that was don't stay inside your cramped apartment all day long. Open the windows, or even better, go outside and walk around. So the open window model for big cities like Chicago or New York, etc., also necessitated a space heater, a really powerful, hot space heater that sat right underneath that open window. That's a small example. Here's another. The federal government advised manufacturers, specifically factories, that they should reconsider having everyone working in the same shift. In fact, they didn't want everyone on the trains at the same time, or for that matter, on the factory floors. So a lot of organizations, the majority of them, begin to create a new shift known as the swing shift. And of course, they had to some extent the late night shift, but now the 3-shift day not only became a model for health and safety, it also ushered in a boom in productivity for factory floor usage per feet. The other real redesign was around healthcare. Previous to the 1918 pandemic, there wasn't a large focus on preventative care, either from a research and development standpoint or from a budgeting standpoint. But after the pandemic, preventative care began to get looked at through the lens of how much dollars are we putting against prevention versus treatment. They even increased the R&D efforts, and there were habits such as wash your hands if you were a doctor or just a regular person like myself, and cover your mouth when you sneeze or cough. All of these redesigns in healthcare came from learnings during the 1918 pandemic. And then finally, and it was ushered in years later in FDR's New Deal, the concept of social distancing in housing became real because people realized at a visceral level that having people live on top of people was dangerous and unsanitary. And these are just a few examples of redesigns that took place based on lessons learned during the 1918 pandemic. It challenged conventional wisdom in several ways, and I think it presented for them an opportunity to improve. Now, obviously, COVID is also incredibly disruptive. It has also ushered in an unprecedented loss of life. It's changed the way we work. It's had a real impact on access to talent. It's had an impact on the economy. And I think what's really important to understand is it's also accelerated trends. One of my favorite books on the subject of what we're going through right now is the book Post-Corona. It's by Professor Scott Galloway, NYU Stern. Some of you might listen to the podcast he does, Pivot, as well as the Professor G show. I think both those are just incredible podcasts. What he says is that the pandemic's primary effect has been to accelerate dynamics already present in society. He points out digital transformation as an example. Now, digital transformation efforts had been going on with a sense of priority and urgency for years before COVID. But after COVID, it was something where organizations tended to double down. They needed to, quote, e-commerceify their offerings and services very quickly. Healthcare had to transition to telemedicine. Organizations, say B2B sales, had to transition to telesales. Data-driven decision-making was important to stay a step ahead. They also had to think about how can we leverage artificial intelligence and automation, especially on the customer critical path as a point of differentiation. So digital transformation has gotten to be something that's moving a lot quicker because of COVID, and I don't think that's going back in the bottle. Deloitte and Fortune do an annual survey of CEOs to measure what they're thinking about when it comes to the next year. Last summer, 2021, they went and talked to CEOs about what was on their mind. Number one was digital transformation. Number two was talent transformation, including the resolution of hybrid work. And then third were growth plans. At the time, top-line growth plans, top line, like increased revenue. Obviously, currently here in Q1 2022, organizations may be shifting the growth plan thinking to bottom-line growth of profits, or at least margins, given what's been going on for the last few weeks in the stock market. But here's the point. The trends are accelerating. The priorities are digital transformation plus talent transformation. That's something that is incredibly important to today's CEO across major organizations. And I think what this does is it takes this conversation of the Great Resignation, and I think it puts it at the very center of any conversation. I've been researching the Great Resignation, had a lot of curiosity about it since it first started to get talked about by an economist in San Antonio way back in early May of 2021. Much like many movements, talent trends tend to start with the most common type of jobs, the lowest skilled labor, and then move to the highest skilled labor. So the Great Resignation started with hourly workers. Those people dealing with the increasingly crazy consumers in services. It's been spreading from hospitality and those type of services, hourly wage, to information work. The Great Resignation showed up as collateral damage in the hourly wage market by the end of 2021. Most economists say that we're going to see it in knowledge work, and it's going to be profound by the second half of 2022. And when you look at some of the statistics, you see that there is a real threat to business continuity. There is a real risk that the Great Resignation could hamper growth plans, especially for organizations that depend on high-skilled talent in an information economy to succeed. Here's just a few of the statistics that we've gathered. Monster.com calculated that over 9 out of 10 people are at least thinking about making a job change. SHRM has revealed that over half of all people by 2021 were doing something about it, whether it was casual networking, making updates to their LinkedIn profile, posting resumes on platforms like Career Builder, or even returning phone calls to recruiters that they used to ignore. The most conservative estimate I've read, and it was by Eagle Hill Consulting, suggests that 1 out of 4 talents will quit their job soon as part of this Great Resignation trend. And it's going to have an impact. And one of the things I want to point out is that Upwork also covers this in our economic research, and in our December 2021 Future Workforce Report, we reveal that 1 out of 5 information workers that we surveyed that are considering leaving their job are also, at the same time, considering going to contract freelance work instead and never re-entering the workforce. And I'll talk about that in a few more minutes and give you some of the reasons why. But here's what all of this underpins. There is a series of trends going on that are triggered by COVID that present a generational opportunity for you as a leader to embark on what I call the Grand Redesign. The redesign of workplace, because work is not a place anymore, work is an outcome. A redesign of workforce, where we as organizations make the conscious decision to meet the market, especially the talent market, where they are, so that we can compete and we can produce the most value. And then workflow, an area ripe for redesign, especially around how we implement initiatives and programs and projects. So those are the 3 things I'm going to talk about: workplace, workforce, and workflow. History favors those that think strategically during times of uncertainty, during times of equal opportunity crisis, so you have this opportunity to employ design thinking. Steve Jobs often referred to design as the constant act of problem solving, and I totally agree. Design thinking is the idea that you are willing to go back to the very beginning, shaking off all conventional wisdom, asking first principle type questions about exactly what causes the issues to occur in an organization, in a market, or an economy that you can address, and being willing to experiment with trying new things. Let's talk first of all about workplace. Many of us had to redesign how we worked back in March and April of 2020 because of the quarantines. Many of us went from mostly in the office to almost completely working from home. Because of that, a lot of people referred to it as the great work experiment of 2020, but a lot of us begin to see that the conventional wisdom that work was a place and that we had to be in the office to be productive and effective, we saw that that conventional wisdom did not stand the test of 2020's experiment in many situations. Let me go over just a few statistics with you. In 2019, pre-COVID, less than 6% of people worked from home. The office, especially for us in knowledge work, that's where we worked. Even the temps that we hired oftentimes came into our office and worked on site as well. We had a philosophy of management by walking around and collaboration by running into each other. Today, according to Upwork research, 1 out of 4 people are working remotely in knowledge work industries. But here's the interesting thing. Our same research reveals that in 2025, presumably long after the quarantines go away, 20%, that's 1 out of 5, will still be working from home, or at least they will be working remotely. And by that I mean they might be working in a shared workspace that is very close to their home. They might be working from a variety of different places, maybe even regional hubs that have been established to create convenience for the purpose of talent acquisition. Now, working from home or remote work wasn't something that was invented in response to COVID. In fact, a lot of organizations were remote first long before COVID. I'll give you an example. There's a really good book. I recommend you read it. It's called Brave New Work. It's by Aaron Dignan. He has a consulting firm called The Ready. They do strategic consulting, they do integration work, they help organizations transform. And from the beginning, Aaron never had headquarters. Instead, his teams were organized around major client locations because the Ready was based on larger client engagements, because they realized that regional distribution like this, and for that matter, finding the strategic talent in those regions made for a better client experience. And so in the book, Brave New Work, he talks about really challenging all the conventional wisdom, starting with where you work. I'll give you another example. Basecamp. A lot of people have heard of this software company. Again, a book I love and recommend is Basecamp co-founder Jason Fried. He wrote a book called Rework. It is a great, if not entertaining, book. By the way, one of my favorite quotes in Rework is when he says that policies are the scar tissue of an organization, often invented as an over-response to something that'll never happen again. Little digression there, but anyway, the book is full of gems like this. Basecamp was always designed to be remote, and there's a couple of reasons why. Jason believed that the office was a tool, not a place where you did the work. It was a tool for collaboration. It was a tool for getting together with people, but he wanted access to a global workforce and not just whoever was located in the offices where he had his headquarters. So the Basecamp organization was always remote first, and they're not the only organization. So there has been a track record for organizations to be remote first, but obviously there's more of it now than ever. I've done a little collaboration with our chief economist, Adam Ozimek, who has been tracking remote work long before the pandemic. And we've identified that there are basically 6 different workplace design options in front of you. So as you think about designing workplace, let's talk about the 6 different options that you have. First, there is remote first. Remote first says that we, as a default, work remotely. Every single employee in the organization is invited to work remotely if that's their preference. If we do gather together or hold offices, it is for the purpose of conscious collaboration, and it will be sporadic. Upwork, for example, is remote first. We're not alone. You probably read around a lot of tech and consulting organizations that have announced they're going to be remote first also. They're going to enjoy some savings around real estate, but most importantly, they're going to enjoy a competitive advantage in the war for talent. For those remaining professionals in hard-to-fill roles that want to work remotely, it's going to be a value proposition. That's a real big reason that we went remote first. If you also think about the Upwork independent talent pool, they all work remotely too as freelancers and consultants and virtual teams. We're meeting that market where they are, and we're working remote first. The second model for workplace design is remote for now. And that's what many of you might be going through, especially as we weather this newest variant of COVID. So remote for now basically says, well, you know, for now, we're all going to work remotely. We're going to do the best we can. And then we're just going to kind of wait and see. For those organizations, you've also probably experienced the ability to now look at a global workforce when it comes to hiring. You can certainly go beyond the zip codes where you have offices, which has greatly expanded the possibilities for you to get the best engineers, the best marketing talent, the best customer support talent, the best digital talent, all on board on your teams. Who knows where you're going to go later? That's why I want to talk about the other models. Model number 3 is remote friendly. Remote friendly says we are going to maintain our offices. We are going to largely work in person. However, we will be friendly to those that have a stated need to work remotely. Maybe they cannot or do not want to relocate to that HQ, and you think they're a very high value talent. You will make an exception for them and be remote friendly. Maybe they are a caregiver. Maybe they want to spend more time with their kids or have that flexibility to do that. Remote friendly says in pursuit of the top talent, especially in pursuit of talent density, we are going to be friendly to those remote opportunities, but we're going to do that on a case-by-case basis. And that's a long-term strategy. Again, I think there's some advantages, especially in terms of talent acquisition, to that design approach. Then there is number 4, hybrid by role. What this means is that some organizations may see that if you work in IT, if you work in facilities, maybe if you're on the leadership team where we need daily chair-to-chair collaboration, you're going to come into the office. But if you work in other roles, say like sales and sales enablement, computer design outside of the tech stack, etc., you can work from home. So there'll be some segmentation there based on an analysis of which roles can be successfully filled and be productive working remotely. There are other organizations that think of hybrid by experience level. This is especially true for sales-driven organizations where they might say very junior associates are going to be working in the office because we want to groom them, we want to train them, we want them to have that bustle around them, but more experienced talents will have the ability or the option to work remotely. In this case, again, there is a conscious segmentation going on, either based on the role or based on the level of experience that determines that company's approach to hybrid. The 5th model is hybrid by day mix. I've had a lot of conversations with people that track work innovation, Deloitte Center of Work, Stanford Center of Work, Harvard Business School professors multiple times. We've discussed this. Some people say we're doing 2 days in, we're doing 3 days out, we're doing 3 days in, 2 days out. We're going to work Monday and Friday, but be off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, be out on Monday, Friday. Here's the consensus I've heard from everyone. We don't know. No one really knows which one of those models is going to work best. That is going to be a function of testing and iteration. I will tell you, though, there are both benefits to it, meaning you get a lot more collaboration than you would being remote first, but there's some drawbacks, as I'm about to explain, because the day mix still impacts your talent acquisition value proposition, and it still leaves you with the same relative real estate costs. But that's emerging as a big discussion point around workplace design. And then finally, number 6, there's Onsite First. Onsite First basically says, if you want to work at our company, you're going to come into the office. And we've heard a lot about this over the last few months from organizations ranging from JP Morgan to Netflix, where leaders say, I don't think people can be productive, I don't think we can maintain culture unless we are physically in the office, and that is going to be a new paradigm where they've made that conscious decision. So the issue here is that what you need to think about, but think about it from a design standpoint, is what workplace approach is right for you. And what you really have to challenge, though, is the concept that work is a place. I believe work is an outcome. What you really have to challenge is, that's the way we've always done things. No, I think it's time for us to stop and study, because there's just too much good data that suggests any one of those 6 design approaches can work. So here are some keys for you to consider as you look at redesigning or setting design for the workplace. First of all, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question. Do you want a global talent pool to choose from, or are you satisfied with localized talent pockets where you have offices? That's not a trick question. Different people have different answers, but it's a fundamental question you have to ask yourself, and the data needs to drive your decision. And you also need to think about that in particular roles, especially if you're taking a hybrid by role approach. The second thing you have to ask yourself is, do you think you can collaborate well from a distance? Can you champion asynchronous collaboration, make that work? And can you maintain culture at a distance? Are you investing in the tools? Are you investing in culture building using virtual technology? I'll tell you this, at Upwork, we think yes to both of those questions, but some organizations, I've mentioned them before, JP Morgan, Netflix, they say no. It's something you have to think about for yourself, and you'll also need to talk to your people to take a look at how they've been collaborating, measure that impact, and how they've been culture building, especially with new hires, measure that impact as well. The third thing is, if you are thinking about hybrid by day mix, for example, 2 days in, 3 days out, you have to consider a few things. Researchers, several I've talked to, they have a concept now, it's called the 1.5 day rule. 1.5 day rule basically says 1.5 is the tipping point, 1.5 days a week in the office, where most talents, that's almost 3 out of 4, believe they're going to have to live in that market to work at that company. So if you're 2 days in or more, then people that want to work for you are going to need to live close to your offices. Gone are the days of old guys like me that are willing to travel 4 times a month to make it to those 2-day-a-week type of engagements to be employed, especially with so many organizations offering remote first. I think it's going to be too competitive in the current talent market. So you need to be very careful when you go over that 1.5 threshold. You are now looking at localized talent pockets. By the way, researchers like to use statistics like 1.5 to prove they have a sense of humor. The other issue too, as our chief economist Azim Ozamek points out, is that if you do have a multiple day in the office, 2 in, 3 in, whatever, you're not going to save any money on real estate, sans a little bit on utilities or food if you cater. You're largely going to have the exact same real estate liability costs. The fourth thing you need to consider is remote first and remote friendly. You've got to invest in training managers to lead based on outcomes, not attendance and attitude and aptitude, what they used to call AAA management style. This is one of the most fundamental takeaways, and I talked to you about this last year as it was emerging. When I look at the most effective, fast-growing, dominant tech organizations in the world, they have a culture leading outcomes. They are very good at visualizing an outcome and an OKR for every role, and not just sales where it's easy to measure quota, not just marketing where there's a lot of established key performance indicators. They've learned to measure everyone's performance based on the outcome. They resource for outcomes, they coach and do one-on-ones based on outcomes, and they reward exclusively based on outcomes. This is really an important ethic to build, because if you do that, your managers will be incredibly successful, generating productivity and innovation amongst those that are working remote first or in a remote-friendly environment for superstars. Finally, number 5, do not take back remote first or remote friendly. If we've seen one thing from the Great Resignation amongst multiple causes, saying things like you'll be able to work from home and then changing, pivoting, and saying now you've got to come back to the office will lead to a lot of turnover and a lot of ill will between talent and your organization. So as you set the design, set it based on data and be committed to it over at least the mid to long term. Now, once you have done redesign work around the workplace, you will find, as I'm about to reveal, that you are now enabled to reimagine the workforce composition. Full-time first as a paradigm is even more entrenched than in-person work as a paradigm. Over the last decades, companies have been leading talent transformation initiatives across their organizations. In fact, as I mentioned before, the Deloitte Fortune Summer 2021 CEO survey revealed that talent transformation was number 2, only behind digital transformation, as a point of emphasis for CEOs going into 2022. So this idea of having a blended workforce of full-time, fractional, and on-demand talent is an area of talent innovation, and it's also an area of increased performance opportunities. Because one of the things we've learned is that millions of the best talents in the world do not want to be acquired. This has been a long-standing model. I've been in technology, if I'm going to include statistics, since the mid-1980s, and trust me, talent acquisition is everybody's job. Talent is our greatest access. I've been involved in a variety of startups as an advisor, acqui-hires, the idea that an engineer is worth $1 million to value. All of those thinking points are entrenched. But what we're seeing now is that there's cracks in those models as organizations have realized you've got to meet the market where it is. And if there's one thing you're probably learning from the Great Resignation, you didn't own them. They're leaving you. You were leasing them all along. So I think this issue of really thinking differently about talent in terms of composition is a real area of opportunity. I want to use an analogy here around cloud computing. Cloud computing largely has existed since the turn of the 21st century. Commercial bow was 2006 with AWS, but where it really started to get traction and become something that people used even though they had some fears about reliability and security was after the Great Recession. To make budget, you needed to variabilize the cost of technology. You needed to move your model to pay for technology as you used it, not make those incredibly expensive investments in premise computing and installed application technology. And cloud computing created this real paradigm shift from technology acquisition to technology access. And that's how I think about talent transformation. Talent transformation is a paradigm shift where we move from talent acquisition to a mindset of talent access where we have a blended workforce of full-time team members, contract team members who might be working fractionally or on a project basis, and an on-demand talent cloud that we're continuing to add to as our overall bench strategy. One of the things that I think is really important to point out here, I mentioned before that we did a future workforce report pulse survey. We released it in December of 2021. There's a remarkable finding. Managers who became comfortable leading remote full-time team members have also become comfortable relying on virtual team members that are working freelance or on contract or as a virtual agency. And the reason they've become comfortable with that is because they've become adept at leading based on outcomes. I think this is a really important point because now this workplace design of getting comfortable with remote work has enabled a workforce redesign at working more and more with on-demand talents because you're really good at managing outcomes. Let me give you a case study, Flexera. Private equity-backed firm Flexera, a couple of years ago, at the behest of a board member, began to try Upwork to accelerate how quickly their programs and projects came to market. They initially started to use us in areas where it connected with growth plans and PE firm action items, specifically new products, service enhancements. And what they learned very quickly with testing is that when they made Upwork and our talent marketplace part of, quote, the water supply for program and project managers, where they could access our marketplace at the beginning of a project's life, to Upwork as many of the tasks as possible, they were 50% faster in executing programs and projects. They call it now project velocity. That means they were able to make predictions they could actually keep. Their speed to market went up dramatically, and it helped them unlock incredible value in their market space. And the Flexera model's so interesting because it also changed the mindset even at a job description level. TJ Hustis, previous to the Upwork experience, was the global head of talent acquisition, but because their mindset shifted as the market shifted, his new title quickly became the global head of talent access because he made that leap from talent acquisition to talent access. Let me show you what is actually possible as you look at talent transformation through a strategic lens. So again, the traditional full-time first model would say that the majority of the work, the vast majority, like 85, 90% of all of the work that is done will be done by full-time team members, and we'll have this 10 to 15% cloud, if you will, talent cloud of vendors and contractors of record, temps from staffing firms, and to some extent freelancers and contractors from work marketplaces like Upwork. It's going to have that thin layer. In contrast, take a look at the model of digital organizations that utilize digital platforms to resource the work. Starting back again 2008, 2009, a lot of organizations, and I've read about many of them, inclusive of companies like Google and Tesla, begin to rethink how they built their workforce, and they begin to grow a much more robust cloud and be much more mindful about the addition of full-time team members. As I've talked to one chief financial officer at a major organization, she described the concept of headcount creep. And what that means is that during growth periods, you have additional headcount that's being added without any real science. You think you need a full-time person to do something, you open up a job rec, the headcount budget is approved, and you add that full-time role, and you end up really bloating out your core of full-time team members. But instead, what many organizations are starting to do is to put the same industrial science around talent that they put around all the rest of the spending at the company, and they think of fractional first if you can't be very clear on how much time out of that 40 hours is that person going to be spending on task based on their skills in their resume and in their career. That changes everything. And if you look at this optically, there's a few things. Thing number one, these digital organizations, AWS, for example, is another one, Accenture is another one. There's many of these I've studied. They have a smaller core, which makes them much more agile, because it's very difficult. It is not a variable cost structure, your payroll. And it is very difficult to upskill or transition people to new specialized roles. It also means that your organizational agility is not as great. So these organizations are more agile, but here's the thing I really want you to center on. They have a bigger world working on their problems. What they discovered is by putting a science behind how they think about full-time additions, in many situations, it ended up being a fractional need the whole time. So as a result, those that move to have a rapidly expanding talent cloud get a lot of 2-for-1s, and at the end of the day, they have a much larger workforce working on their problems and bringing in knowledge across other domains, because many of these independent talents, they work for 3 or 4 enterprise clients, and they have a lot of really good experience working across different domains, and that equals innovation for you. So one of the things I wanted to say is that it's really important to put a science into hiring. I mentioned that before. So let me give you just a couple of things to think about when it comes to workforce transformation. So another person I talked to who was a chief operating officer referred to a lot of full-time hires as guest TEs. And what they meant by that is that it was a full-time hire based on guesswork, where the job rec really wasn't looked at scientifically. So I've interviewed CHROs about this concept of talent access and what the science is behind an effective full-time hire. I hear 2 models. One is based on task time, another is based on tangible, intangible work. So what one CHRO shared with me, and I think this is really smart, is when they look at the opportunity for a full-time hire, they ask themselves, is that person going to be spending at least 70% of their time on task based on their area of expertise? The other 30% of the time, they're going to go to meetings, they're going to collaborate across project lines. If it's not 70% of their time going to be on task out of 40 hours, that means 30 hours or more a week, then they're going to say, we're going to go hire that person on demand or fractionally, and we're going to let billings tell the story as to whether or not we need to transition that fractional hire into a full-time hire. In fact, at Upwork, we've recently announced that we are also enabling you to be able to transition a freelancer or a contractor into being a full-time team member of your company, and we'll help you make that possible as part of how we think about career innovation. Here's the other design way to think about it. Some organizations, these are larger tech companies I've talked to, they have a different model, and it's around the 70% tangible versus 30% intangible. And what they mean is there at least it's sort of like a third or more of their time being done on intangible work like teamwork, like cross-functional collaboration, etc. If at least 30% or more is intangible, they look at that as a full-time hire. Otherwise, they're also going to look at a fractional role to see if that's really a good candidate. I suggest you think about that at design, because what that's going to allow you to do is not only become more agile as an organization, it's going to help you turn operational expense into results, and it's going to help you variabilize that part of your cost structure around talent, specifically payroll, that is currently fixed, much like you variabilized your cost structure around technology in the last decade. One of the things I want to point out too is that when it comes to digital transformation, and I mentioned this a couple of different times, when it comes to digital transformation, the challenge is mostly around getting the right skill sets on board to help you with your projects. Another book I recommend, you might have guessed so far that I am a bookish person, is the book The Technology Fallacy. Researchers at Deloitte and Boston College, working in collaboration with MIT, determined, after looking at 400 companies on a journey to digital maturity, that for companies to ensure access to types of skill sets, they should recognize on-demand markets as strategic. And the reason why is because the technology fallacy, they say, is that digital transformation isn't about access to technology. It's about access to the talent that will complete all of the stitching in the dozens, if not hundreds, of projects and programs that are involved in actually executing any type of digital transformation strategy. Now, you've redesigned workplace thoughtfully. That's led you to thoughtfully redesign workforce, taking into account the opportunity to bring in more independent talent. Here's the final thing I want to talk about for just a few minutes before we take questions, and that is, how do we redesign workflow? Workflow is broken, as I'm about to explain. We're burning out operations, and projects fail more than 2 out of 3 times, and I think it is a function of design. There's a great article called The Project Economy. It's in the Harvard Business Review. It is written by a former leader of the Project Management Institute. He is a global expert on project design. He explains that basically at an organization there's 2 work streams. There's operations and there's projects. Operations, many of us have very specific roles in delivering against centers of excellence. Projects, however, comprise almost 80% of an organization's incremental value, and at organizations, we really don't staff full-time team members for projects outside of project managers. Most project work is done by people that are actually in the operations stack, working across the matrix in cross-functional or tiger team type work, and that is one of the reasons that over 2 out of 3 projects fail. They either fail to happen on time or they fail to deliver what they promise. So let me just talk in conclusion about how we can redesign both operations as well as project work to become much more successful. Let's talk about operations. I mentioned earlier that the Great Resignation is driven by a lot of things, but what the research is bearing out is that the #1 cause of the Great Resignation is burnout. Now, I know I talked to you about this last year. I want to emphasize one more time, burnout is a crisis that is the great driver of turnover, especially of your highest function talent. And one of the ways to think and use design to avoid burnout is load management. Load management started out in the energy industry around keeping utility grids online. It was picked up by professional sports, most notably the NBA. The NBA, there's a great case study, I wrote about it in Fast Company, where the Toronto Raptors had Kawhi Leonard, a superstar, but they also realized that basketball is the most taxing travel professional sport. You may not know this, but you travel more times for the NBA than any other sport, including Major League Baseball. There is no 3-game stand in basketball. It's an exhaustingly long season, so using load management, Kawhi Leonard skipped some trips. He skipped some minutes during games. He was kept fresh for the playoffs. Not only was he the most valuable player in the World Championship, Toronto won its first World Championship using load balancing thinking, and it has spread to the world of work. We talk to organizations all the time, shifting from basketball to golf, like the PGA, where Kevin Scott, who runs their technology group, has a program, he calls it Buy a Buddy, which is incremental budget that he gifts to every contributor so that they can use the work marketplace like Upwork to offload non-core work, to take back time for themselves, and to load manage themselves so they're fresh and they're energetic. Organization like Nestle in Italy, in Japan, Sony, all been experimenting with the 4-day work week with some success. At Upwork, we've been using something called charge-up days. So for example, we take a holiday like Labor Day, where you have Monday off, and we take Friday off the week before Labor Day and Tuesday off the day after Labor Day to give that talent a 5-day weekend where the entire company is off, which eliminates all the slacks, which interrupt our time off, all the emails, and all the chatter. That's a way we've used that redesign to approach load management. Finally, I want to talk about project management. Project management is a real area of opportunity, and what we see is that you need to look upstream for solutions like the work marketplace to make sure projects land on time instead of thinking about it downstream when there's a problem with the project. So what we're seeing organizations do, and what researchers call the project canvas, is that when you have a project that's been approved and funded, and you understand what the deliverables are, inclusive of major programs, the first thing you do is you skill source all the tasks that roll up to the deliverable. So if you're launching a new product, you might have some components. There's the actual product design and build, there's the marketing inclusive of comms for the project, and there's customer success build out for the project launch. Those are 3 components. Underneath each component are a series of tasks. And if at the beginning of the project's life, those tasks are assigned to the work marketplace, and you leave only the ones that either for a security and safety reason or for a specialization reason you want your internal team members to do for the end, you will find that the vast majority of the work can be guaranteed for delivery at the beginning of the project, as in the case of Flexera, increasing your velocity and increasing the likelihood that the project lands when the project is supposed to land. So redesigning workflow to resource the talent early in the process, or in fact even look at automation capabilities, is a better way of ensuring a greater degree of program and project success in the future. As we're about to go into Q&A, what I'd like to do is leave you with a thought. So as you look at this grand redesign, remember, it's a generational opportunity. This is a time of great disruption where you can make major changes and you can undo conventional wisdom. There's one principle I want to leave you with, and that's the principle of empathy. Design thinking is based on understanding the perspective of the customer, or in this case, the customer and the talent. Because again, if we've learned anything from the Great Resignation, talent is never acquired. Talent agrees to be available to you, and we need to think about them like an internal customer if we want to be successful. So having empathy when it comes to workplace for what the talent needs. Having empathy when it comes to workforce for what the talent needs, what investors need, what your end customer needs in terms of the velocity of your speed to market, projects getting to market when they're supposed to, especially service enhancements, having empathy for them along the way, having empathy for your people around workflow. Those are all the cores of how to be successful design thinkers and design builders. So my final recommendation to you, talk to your people, measure their feelings as well as productivity, and keep on challenging conventional wisdom. On a personal level, I remember in 2014, I moved to Las Vegas. I was traveling more than 100 times a year as a speaker and a consultant. I loved how close I could live to the airport, 20 minutes from my garage to the gate. I loved the amenities of living in Las Vegas. After COVID, I had joined Upwork. Upwork went remote first. I relocated. I moved myself to a ranch halfway between Scottsdale, Arizona and Sedona. It's beautiful. I have fiber that comes to my house and my Zoom room, and I've made my own redesign, and it has led me to a better place. And I hope that you have your own decisions you make on designs that do the same for you to help you unlock value and compete for years to come.